The last part of your annotated bibliography is going to be a thesis statement. So you started out with the research question that you wanted to answer with your research. And then the body of the annotated bibliography is supposed to reflect the research that you did. So you've got your 3 sources in there, and then you've got your summary and reflection of each of those three sources. So you should end up answering your research question at the end in the form of your thesis statement. So in theory, you are supposed to use your research to help you come up with your answer to your research question. For your thesis statement, you have to meet these 5 criteria listed here. I'm going to walk you through them on this website where they came from. So I've got this resource pulled up. So your thesis statement has to be debatable. That means that if people are given all of the same facts, they could still come to different legitimate conclusions. So to be debatable, it cannot be a fact, and it cannot be something that everyone pretty much already agrees on anyway. So here's an example. Junk food is bad for your health. This is not a thesis statement because it's a fact. You cannot argue that junk food is good for you. So instead, you could say, because junk food is bad for your health, notice that you can put that fact at the beginning of there. Because junk food is bad for your health, the size of sodas offered at fast food restaurants should be regulated by the federal government. So that would definitely be debatable because some people would argue in support of that, and then some people would completely disagree. But both of those are legitimate conclusions that you can make based on that fact that junk food is bad for your health. So it is debatable. The second criteria, it must be assertive. That means you must take a stance. You cannot be neutral anymore. Your research question was supposed to be neutral, but the thesis, you have to pick a side. Examples, federal immigration law is a tough issue about which many people disagree. So that person has not picked a side yet. Instead, federal immigration enforcement law needs to be overhauled because it puts undue constraints on state and local police. So here they've taken a stance that it needs to be overhauled. Next, your thesis must be reasonable. So you cannot argue something completely ridiculous. It has to be something that is possible. Example, city council members stink and should be thrown in jail. That is not reasonable. That's never going to happen. Just because you don't like someone, you can't just say they belong in jail. Instead, city council members should be term limited to prevent one group or party from maintaining control indefinitely. This is reasonable. This is possible. We have term limits for elected politicians all the time. So this is a reasonable assumption here, a reasonable thesis. Next, your thesis must be evidence-based. This means that you cannot argue for something based on just moral reasons. That makes some of your more moral topics kind of tricky. So you're going to have to find a thesis that you can prove or back up with evidence. Evidence has to be something that you can see in real life, definitive. There has to be data or science behind it. So example, individuals convicted of murder will go to hell when they die. We have no way of definitively proving that, so that cannot be a thesis statement. On the other hand, rehabilitation programs for individuals serving life sentences should be funded because these programs reduce violence within prisons. So this one, you could gather the evidence to see if those rehabilitation programs do or do not reduce violence. Finally, it must be focused. So you cannot have a huge, broad claim like the federal government should overhaul the U.S. tax code. The tax code is giant, thousands of pages. So you need to be much more specific. The U.S. House of Representatives should vote to repeal the federal estate tax because the revenue generated by that tax is negligible. So that estate tax is one tiny part of the overall U.S. tax code. So that is focused enough, narrow enough, where you could use that as your thesis statement for a small research paper like this. Let's think about a couple of examples. So one of the topics on the SIRS database was about shortening the school week. So an example that a different class came up with was, in order to save money on utilities and the school bus gas, then the school week should be shortened to only 4 days. So let's look at that thesis and see if it meets the criteria. In order to save money on utilities and school bus gas, the school week should be shortened to only 4 days. So is that debatable? Would people debate both ways? Yes, some people think the school week should be shortened and some people don't. So it is debatable. Assertive, does it take a stance? Yes, that the school week should be shortened to 4 days. Is it reasonable? For some people, they might not think it's reasonable because the school week has been 5 days forever. But there are some states and cities that have shortened the school week to 4 days. So it is reasonable. Evidence-based. By building in the part at the beginning of the thesis in order to save money on utilities and school bus gas, that is leading into the idea of evidence. So all you would have to do to prove your thesis then is to find evidence that the shortened school week would reduce the money that the school district would have to pay for utilities and gas. And then focused. So instead of trying to overhaul lots of different things about school to save money, like, I don't know, textbooks or computers or whatever, this is just one small solution about saving money. So it is focused. So that example does meet the criteria for the thesis statement. Let's try one more. Social media should be banned because it is morally wrong. So let's look at that one. Is that debatable? Would people disagree? Yes. Is it assertive? Does it take a stance? Yes. Social media should be banned because it's morally wrong. So that definitely takes a stance. People would definitely debate on it too. Is it reasonable? Is social media ever going to be fully banned? Probably not. So I don't think this is reasonable. Is it evidence-based? So the disclaimer in there that because it's morally wrong, you can't prove that with evidence. So that part would have to go in order for it to be evidence-based. You would need to come up with a different reason why social media should be banned in order for it to be evidence-based. Is it focused enough? Maybe you could make it more focused if you chose just one social media platform, but I think it's a narrow enough topic that it would be okay. So to be more reasonable about this claim, you might want to change it to school districts could block social media platforms, or parents should monitor their children using social media. Those are more reasonable than just flat out banning them for everybody. And then since we got rid of our reasoning because it's morally wrong, if you were going to use this one as your thesis, you would need to put in a different reason to make it evidence-based. So more evidence-based solutions could be about it's bad for kids' self-esteem, or it is addicting, or it is a waste of time when they could be doing something more beneficial. Any of those, you should be able to find evidence to support them.